Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel, and hi if you're new here, I'm Jade, and it is time for July's wrap up. But July has been a very successful month for me. I've actually read 13 books. 2 of them I think were on my Kindle, so it hasn't like reduced my physical TBR like fully, but overall like I've cleared a good amount off I feel this month, and I've read some really good books. So let's get into it because this could end up being a long one if I ramble. So yeah, let's just start. So my first read was on my Kindle, and it was actually just a novella. So it was this novella, which is from the Nyaxia series by Carissa Broadbent. So I did say I don't know how far to carry on with this series just because I heard that the first original duology was the best. But as you can see, I love this novella, and this novella is set around this original duology. It follows 2 characters that we meet in the second book that we don't get to know very well within the main story, and it's just sort of their backstory and how they met, and I actually loved it. I was so absorbed into this. As short stories go, like I never have too high expectations for novellas because obviously they're not very long and they often can't really get too meaty in the story. But actually I just ended up loving our main female protagonist in this novella. Obviously I can't talk too much because they are characters from the original, so I wouldn't want to spoil things, but essentially it is about how they met. One was human, one was vampire. Kind of a interspecies love story. And if you have read the original duology of this series but not picked up the novella, I highly recommend it. That's all I'm going to say. And if you're going to start the series, make sure you get this novella. I just think it was great. And then the next book I picked up was one that I think my TBR jar picked for me for this month, which is the Bridgerton's Duke and I story. As you can probably see, I've given it 3 stars, so I didn't love it, but I definitely didn't hate it by any means. Like I still had a really good time with this book. I think the trouble is you can't help but compare it to the TV show. And honestly, the TV show just does it so much better. It adds more subplots, you get to know other characters more. And honestly, the whole mystery over who is Lady Whistledown is not really played upon in here. Like Lady Whistledown, you know, exists, but it's kind of minor in this book, whereas I feel like the show centered around it. It made it almost into a bit of a mystery romance on the TV show, especially with the first season, whereas this is definitely more that old school romance story. That being said, I do really like our Bridgerton characters, so I still enjoyed reading Daphne's story here. I just think it could have done with a little bit more. I felt like the beginning was a little slow. Honestly, it's just comparing to the show, it lacks. I wanted the Lady Whistledown mystery, even though I know who it is now. But yeah, I just didn't get that from the book. So I just feel like the book just lacks a little bit. The TV show does it better, which is rare for me to say that about books, but it's true here. However, if you haven't watched the Bridgerton TV show, and this is slightly different, I feel, we are following Daphne, who is of age. It's sort of like her year to sort of be presented and to find a husband, but she's not really keen on that idea, honestly. She really wants to try and sort of marry for love rather than just be thrown with someone. And then she meets the Duke, who is trying to avoid marriage, and they come up with this ruse that they should just pretend to be engaged so people leave them alone, but then they won't actually get married. So it's not really like enemies to lovers, but it's more like friends of convenience catch feelings, I guess. Like I said, if I hadn't seen the TV show, this could hit very differently, but I just can't help but think about it in comparison. So yeah, 3 stars, had a fun time. Am I going to carry on reading the Bridgerton books? Honestly, I'm not sure. I think I might just stick with the TV show. And then the next book I picked up was Sweet Little Lies by Frear. I think this one was picked by my TBR jar as well for this month. But anyway, this is a thriller if you haven't heard of Frear or this book. My cousin actually gifted this to me thinking I would like it, and I did. I gave it a 3.75. The only reason I couldn't rate it higher, because while I love the story and the concept, is the main character just kind of frustrated me a little bit. And I will say the pacing wasn't perfect. Like certain parts I was like addicted to this book, and then there was other parts where I was a bit like, oh come on, like I just want to get to the next thing, you know. But essentially in this book we follow a detective called Kat Kinsella, and she is called to investigate a murder with her colleagues, and it turns out she actually knew the victim. However, she doesn't reveal this to her colleagues, and that's kind of my first issue with the book, is like she is so not professional at all that it got a bit stupid, I guess, to me. Like, maybe it's because I watch so many cop shows, and I also have a lot of police in my family, in my history, so I don't know. But anyway, suspending your disbelief a little bit, she ends up investigating this murder, and she starts to suspect her dad could be involved, so she starts getting quite paranoid and investigating a lot of things to do with it. So essentially she kind of solves the murder, but somehow gets away without revealing that she, you know, knew the victim. But yeah, so essentially she goes quite far to try and solve this murder. She's obviously very, very invested in it, bearing in mind that she knew the victim. Not like they were super close. She was I think a friend of her sister's. I'm pretty sure that's how I remember it. But yeah, she suspects her dad could have something to do with it, and he sort of just sends her in this little bit of a spiral, and I think that's what causes the lies to build up. So it does sort of make sense that she hides a lot, but it just got a little bit unbelievable that no one was like realizing. However, as you can often imagine with many good thrillers, a lot of the characters start becoming linked together and she starts to make certain connections. So there's a few little twists and stuff to the plot, and eventually they obviously find out who the killer was and what happened. Another thing to note about Kat, our main character, she is in therapy. So she's not the most reliable of narrators, I would say. So like, we are reading from her perspective. So I did find myself questioning sometimes exactly if this is really how things played out, which I think can add an interesting dynamic to the story, but it was never really suggested that she was mentally unstable particularly, but like the whole therapy thing really drew on it and suggested she was. But I did quite like the psychological element of like how it was affecting her, that she thought maybe people she knew was involved. And yeah, there was definitely some interesting twists and dynamics to this book. Just for me, it was just the slight unbelievability of how much she managed to lie here. I think that didn't make it a great read for me, but I still had a very, very good time with it, and I still recommend it if you enjoy your thrillers. It's just not like standout for me. So the next book was so exciting for me. It is the new Labyrinth illustrated novelization. Yes, new book. I pre-ordered this before I was on a book buying ban, okay? Because I knew it was something that I would love and cherish. And I'm just a huge fan of Jim Henson's movie Labyrinth, if you hadn't gathered already. You know, the one with David Bowie, Jennifer Connelly. Great story. And they just released this new official illustrated novelization, which has some beautiful pictures in it, and it's written really well. Like, I think the story makes more sense than the other novelization that I have read of Labyrinth. This one pictures things a little bit better, like even in, you know, in words, like through adjectives, through description. And then you obviously have the illustrations for visuals, because I do think if you wanted to read the book without watching the movie, generally it's not designed that way, but I think this one you could get away with it. The original novelization just wouldn't make sense. But if you are interested in this is about a young girl who wishes her brother is taken by a goblin king because she has been left to babysit and she's not happy about it. And then obviously realizes that was a huge mistake and has to go through this labyrinth to try and save her brother. But honestly, if this kind of story does interest you, I would go for the movie first. I just think it makes more sense. So this is a little bit of a different one for a book where I'm like, watch the movie. But I gave it 5 stars because it is really well written as a novelization goes, and I just love the pictures in here too. Just a great thing to own if you're a Labyrinth fan. If you're a Labyrinth fan and you don't own this, go buy it. So in case you missed it, I was doing a find book similar to Labyrinth quest again this month, and the first one I actually picked up for that was Caraval by Stephanie Garber. I'm not really going to talk about the books in comparison to Labyrinth here. Go watch my Labyrinth video if you're intrigued to see what I think in terms of how it gives vibes of Labyrinth. But I'm just going to talk about how much I enjoyed each of these books as their own thing. So as you can tell, loved this book. Gave it 5 stars instantly. I was like literally hooked from the beginning. I didn't want to put this down. I read this so quickly. I literally devoured it, and I have had this on my TBR for so long, so I'm ashamed that I haven't got to it like until now. I feel like that's kind of the case with a lot of books though, because there's only so many you can get to quickly, but still. So in this book, we follow a girl called Scarlett, and she's always wanted to go to something called the Caraval. It's kind of like this circusy type creepy games, I guess you could say. And it is ran by this mysterious guy called Legend, and she has written for years and years, begging him to bring it to them so she can take part, so she can go, because that's just something she's always wanted to do. Then you skip forward, she is now an adult. She is destined to marry someone. She's been put in this like arranged marriage that her father has organized for her. And she's kind of happy with this. This is her life. But her and her sister then suddenly get a letter from Legend, who runs Caraval, inviting them to the event. And she's kind of torn because she's like, no, I've got to get married and everything. She's quite the sensible one, Scarlett, whereas Teller is like, no, I am going to take you to these games. And she ends up getting the help of a random sailor, and they end up basically kidnapping Scarlett and taking her to Caraval. And then once they arrive on the island, Teller, Scarlett's sister, goes missing, and Scarlett realizes this is part of the game and she needs to win. She needs to find her sister or something is going to be very, very bad. And essentially in Caraval, nothing is what it seems. There seems to be like elements of magic. It's very, very weird and dark, and no one really knows what's real, what's not real. It definitely has a sort of like dark vibe undertone. It is YA, so it's not like super creepy or anything, but I don't think it reads super YA. Like, I don't feel like you'll pick this up and feel like, oh, this is really young, I don't want to read this. So technically it's classified as YA, but I loved it. I don't really feel like it's YA. So if you like a sort of game-based, dark vibed fantasy with even kind of like a bit of a like mystery thriller element, honestly, this book is going to be for you. Like, I honestly loved it. I can't wait to continue with the series. So highly, highly, highly recommend this one. Then next, I picked up The Forbidden Game by LJ Smith. This is actually like 3 books in one, but as it came as this sort of like massive book with all 3, I just sort of read it as one. In my Labyrinth comparison video, I did say I actually think the first book is way better. I don't really think there's a need for books 2 and 3. I kind of wish I'd just read the first. And that's why I rated this collectively as 3.25, because I think the first story I may rate more like a 4-star, but the second one I really wasn't that keen on, and the third one was like, okay. So I think if I'd just read the first, I would have rated this much more favorably. Even though like 3.25 is not bad, I still enjoyed my time with it. It wasn't boring, but it is YA, and it does feel quite YA, especially as the series goes on to me. However, this starts with a girl called Jenny, and she is trying to buy something for her boyfriend's birthday, and she ends up buying this game that they can all play at this sort of party they're hosting for his birthday. They're in high school, in case you're wondering, sort of age range setting. So they all decide to play this board game, and essentially they find out it's not quite what it seems, and they all get sucked into it. So it's very Jumanji vibes, actually. You know, they kind of get sucked in this board game and potentially they could die. Like, you know, it's real stakes. It's very, very real. But essentially they have to all face their biggest fear in order to be able to escape this board game. The reason they've ended up in here is there is this sort of immortal guy that has been watching Jenny and decided he has fallen in love with her, and he decides this is a way to trap her. So he is trying to persuade her that if you just stay with me, if you agree to be with me, I will let all your friends go and out of the game. But of course, they're going to keep fighting. They're going to try and get out of this game. So that's what it's about. Obviously, the second and third are just sort of continuations of that. So they get sucked in again in the second. The third's a little bit different and a bit more twisted, which is why I said I sort of preferred that to the second one. The second one's just a bit repetitive and not done as well, in my opinion. But yeah, if you don't mind something that does feel that little bit more YA, and you do like your kind of like game-based book, because I think this is a good one. I had a fun time with it, but like I said, I definitely don't really wish I'd read books 2 and 3. So the next book I picked up was Wintersong by Jae-Jones, and at first I loved this, but I ended up settling on a 4-star rating because I feel like how it began, I thought, you know what, this does have the potential to be right up there, maybe be like 4.75, 5 stars for me. But then I felt like the pacing really went off, and bits of it just lost my interest, sadly. So even though I loved the concept overall and I loved the characters, I just felt like there were bits of the plot that just moved so slowly in the end. But however, in this book, we follow a girl called Liesl, and it's kind of like a sort of historical fiction fantasy vibe. And because it's set back in the day, Liesl's very suppressed because she's a very talented musician, but no one cares because she's a woman. But her brother is also very talented, so she enjoys playing with him, but she's like the true talent. But the brother gets noticed because he's a boy. However, she like has a very close relationship with him. She's not bitter about it at all. I really like Liesl as a character. But she is very close to her siblings, and one day her sister ends up getting taken by the Goblin King, who people believe to be a myth, and she's taken to the underground, and Liesl knows she has to go and save her. So for those of you that have watched Labyrinth, you can see where some of this story is getting inspired from, but this is like a sort of German folklore mixed with Labyrinth vibes. It's definitely got its own take on things, and I love that it's sort of based around music, because I love music. So it even has a little bit of a Phantom of the Opera vibe to me, like slightly. And the first half of the book honestly had me really hooked. I was so invested in Liesl being able to save her sister and everything, but then it sort of splits into like a second half, and that for me just went kind of slow. I just felt like there could have been a lot more to the plot. I did kind of like how it ended, but I just felt the second half of the book I was a little bit bored when I was reading it, sadly. So yeah, I've gone for 4 stars, which is obviously still quite a good rating, but I think it's because like the beginning for me was 5-star, and then the second part was more like a 3-star, and so I've just put it 4 in the middle. So I sort of recommend it, but I don't highly recommend it, I guess, because it's really hard, I feel like, when a certain area of a book kind of ruins it for me. But yeah, check it out if it sounds interesting. Okay, then the next book I read was Between by L.L. Starling. I did read this one on my Kindle. So in this book, we follow a girl called Sasha. She moves with her friend to this new town where she has got a teaching position. I think it's like kindergarten or something. They're not very old, the children, and everything seems a little bit strange. She kind of finds out that a lot of the people that live there are witches, and it seems like that when she dreams, she manages to go to a completely different world. Now, what's notable here is she hasn't been able to dream since she was like 5 years old. She just hasn't been able to. She moves to this town and it's like it's unlocked and she can just dream again. Well, in her dreams, she goes to this other world, which she finds out is called Between. Between is ran by a sort of shadow king called Lorne, and essentially what happens is she sort of beats this thing within the dream, which now means she is now the rightful queen of the Between. And essentially bad things are going to keep happening until she takes her rightful place as queen. So it's a little bit harsh because she obviously doesn't want that. She doesn't want part of this mystery world. She doesn't want to leave her best friend. So it's all a little bit complex. So I will say overall, I really started out enjoying this story. It was a little bit strange. Like there's definitely a lot of different parts to this. But I generally liked our characters. However, it was just too long. So this was my issue with the book, is a lot of this plot could have been condensed. And then what made it even worse is it was, I think, 1,000 and something pages on my Kindle. I'm pretty sure I've read the physical copy is like 760 pages, something like that. But what made it worse was I felt like there were parts that could be condensed. The chapters were really, really long, so I just felt like I never really got a rest. And they were also just so speech driven. And even though I love speech, it moves on the plot. Like when you've got a whole chapter of like a scene and it's just like people having conversations for like ages and ages and ages, it just dragged a little bit. And then what made it worse was there was a part 2 to the book. So you get like halfway through and then it's like part 2 and it's the same story again, but from the guy's point of view. Now, obviously there are a lot of scenes that differ, so you learn a lot more. And there were certain parts that I really enjoyed seeing from his point of view, but there was a lot of scenes that were the same with the same dialogue. And I was like, this book is just going on and on. So I like the story, I like the concept. I just didn't really like the full execution of it. However, that being said, it ends on a cliffhanger. And the second book comes out in November, so I will be picking it up because I need to know what happens, and I think it is just a duology. I don't know if I really recommend starting it, because if you do, you're gonna want to know what happens next, but I do think it's just a little bit of a slog to get through. I just feel like this story could have been told in so fewer words and been great. So the next book I read was You Deserve to Know by Aggie Blum Thompson. This is a thriller. This was one of the book picks for one of my book clubs, and overall I really enjoyed this. I actually thought I was going to rate it higher than I did. I've given it a 4-star. I still very much enjoyed it, but the reason I couldn't give it 5 was the ending. And that's all I'm going to say there, because obviously I can't tell you really why without spoilers, but for me the ending was too much, let's just say that. But until then I was really absorbed in this and I didn't want to put this book down, and I got through it really, really fast. So in this book we follow a group of neighbours, and it is Gwen, Amy and Lisa and their husbands. And actually, if you watched my wrap up, I think last month, I read an arc for someone, and it actually has similar vibes to this, like very different. And I'm not saying that at all they're a copy, but what I mean is it had similar vibes in that I feel like it was a little bit like Desperate Housewives meets a Freida McFadden thriller. So it was like really easy to get in the story, but it also just had, you know, the sort of female characters where you know that there's jealousy and things going on between them, and not all is what it seems here between these characters, and they all link in more ways than you would think. Then one day Gwen's husband is found murdered, and that's what sort of starts this whole spiral. And as the police are investigating, obviously more and more secrets between the friends and their husbands are sort of revealed, and more twists happen until we get to the conclusion of who killed Gwen's husband. But overall, if you like your thrillers, I do think give this a read. Like I said, I was really, really into it. I just can't rate it higher because the end was just too much for me, but it, you know, I still had a very, very good time with this, because I'm literally talking like the last few pages is where I was like, oh, for me. But I really enjoyed it till then, and if I just forget that last chapter, perfect. I loved it. So I still recommend it. It's a great book. I just, yeah, the ending didn't vibe with me, but if you want to know why, you're gonna have to read it because I can't spoil it for you. Then the next book I picked up was my other book club's choice for the month, which is The House of Salt and Sorrows by Erin A. Craig. I hadn't heard of this book before, and honestly, I was really enjoying it in general, but there were certain parts, which is why I've given it a 3.5 star rating in the end, which just sort of lost my interest and felt a little incohesive. But essentially in this book we follow Annalie, and she is one of 12 siblings. However, we find that 4 of them already passed away. So she's one of 8 now. A lot of people are paranoid, thinking there's a curse on the family, because obviously if the sisters keep dying, it kind of seems that way. And she's sort of determined to find out what is going on. And their investigation uncovers a lot of secrets. It uncovers sort of some magical elements. Honestly, it's really hard to talk about without giving things away, because I feel like certain parts of the plot are quite slow. And if I say much more, it's going to spoil it. But what I will say is her sister that has recently died is found out that she was planning on eloping with her boyfriend, and then Annalie and the boyfriend decide they should start investigating into what happened to her, because they don't believe that she accidentally tripped and fell. They believe it was murder. So essentially it's a bit of a mystery trying to work out who is the killer. I don't really know what genre this comes under. I guess gothic fantasy thriller. And usually I do really like a book that dares to sort of cross genres together. I loved it in Belladonna, and I think it was done really well, so as just an example of a book I loved that did that. And honestly, at the beginning, I was really drawn into this book. It was sort of like historical fiction, gothic thriller vibes, but then it sort of felt like it changed into a romance halfway through, and then to fantasy, and it just felt a little bit chunky. It didn't blend very well together, so I kind of felt like the story was moving without like a nice soft blend through it, and there were just times I was sort of losing interest a little bit. Like there are loads of balls they go to, and the amount of talk of shoes and wearing through shoes, like it is sort of part of the plot, but it was just a bit overdone for me. And honestly, I'd like to see more of Annalie's interactions with her sisters, and just like got a bit more of their own vibe and relationship with her living sisters, because I felt like it was too hung up on everyone that was dead rather than who could die, if that makes sense. And what I will say is I actually guessed the murderer really, really early on. It probably was somewhat a bit of a lucky guess, and I didn't get the full reason why this person was the murderer. Like, I didn't really guess the full plot, but I definitely guessed who the murderer was. What I will say is I really loved our female protagonist, Annalie. I really love her as a character. So I think that's what really kept me hooked through this book, is I still really enjoyed it because I really wanted to know what was going to happen with Annalie. But yeah, I've set it as 3.5. I think partly because I'm slightly disappointed, because I think this has so much potential. Like, I feel like with a few tweaks, this would be an easy 5-star read for me. Whereas there was just those few things and I was like, this has so much potential and this could be so good. But it ended up being just like pretty good. Okay. You know, like I wasn't blown away, but I think I could have been if there was a few tweaks. Okay, the next book, Me Before You, Jojo Moyes. And all I'm going to say is, why didn't I pick up this sooner? There's also a small part of me that wishes I never picked it up. If you've read this book, you're going to know what I mean. I cried buckets reading this. I also laughed out loud at times. There were some really good humorous moments too, but oh my God, was this an emotional roller coaster. I feel like most people are either going to have read this or watched the movie and know this story, but I've been avoiding the movie knowing I wanted to read this off my TBR. This has been on my TBR for like a decade. But anyway, in case you're not aware, this book follows a girl called Louisa, and she loses her job and she needs the money pretty sharpish. She kind of keeps her family afloat at the moment, so they kind of rely on her income, and she is going to the job centre having to find something, and the person at the job centre suggests she goes for this sort of like care job, which she is not keen on, care work. She's like, no, but they're like, this isn't standard care, there's a doctor for most of that stuff, you just need to be there as like a companion. So she takes the job and she finds out she is keeping a quadriplegic company. If you don't know what that is, it means that they have lost use of their legs and their arms. So essentially they can't do a lot. They can like talk, move their head, I think, but like they can't do a lot themselves at all. They're very, very much wheelchair bound. And we find out that Will, who she is looking after, was in an accident, and essentially he's still actually in quite a lot of pain on and off. At first he's quite miserable and she just wants to quit the job. She's like, I'm not up to this, but she sticks with it, and she actually finds out that Will is planning on having assisted suicide. Understandably, he is not living the life he ever wanted and he's in pain. But she is very shocked by this, and it turns out his mother really has hired Louisa, hoping that she might be able to change his mind by showing him there's more worth living for. And essentially the book follows her trying to persuade Will to live, but she can't let him know that she knows that he is planning on assisted suicide. So it's quite a dark topic. And like I said, there's some really good humorous moments, but like, yeah, I cried. Okay, I am not ashamed to say I cried so much in this book, and it's one I'm going to think about forever. And I know I should probably go watch the movie now, but I'm just not sure I'm brave enough, but I should. There is a second book, actually I think a second and third when I looked, so I will have to get them at some point. I don't really know where the story is going to go, because I feel like it's had such a perfect ending. But yeah, easy 5-star for me. If something's going to make me cry that much and just think about life that much, it's an amazing read. And like I said, I should have picked it up years ago because I've owned it for over a decade. So it's just shameful on my part. But I think because I just knew it was really sad. I didn't know a lot about the plot, but I just knew I would cry, and I don't know, I just couldn't bring myself. But yeah, now I'm like so happy I've read it. But at the same time, like I said, a small part of me is like, that was hard, and I wish I hadn't. But truly deep down, I am very glad I did. I think you need books that make you really feel. That's my favorite. The Poet Empress, things like that. Like anything that makes me overthink life and feel things are great. So if you haven't read this one, go and read it. And then I finally got round to reading the third part of The Housemaid by Freida McFadden. Obviously, being a third part, I can't really talk about it too much. I gave it 3.5 stars, which is the lowest out of the main books in the trilogy. Higher than I gave the novella. I hated the novella, to be honest. But the first book I loved. Second book I thought was pretty decent, but it's a little repetitive, so not as good. This one, it's a little different in plot, but to me it loses the characters. So that's all I'm going to say. The reason I've given it 3.5, easy to get into. Everything Freida McFadden just sort of draws me in, and I'm never bored. So I was completely invested in this story and not bored. But deep down, I just knew that the characters didn't feel right. Our main character of Millie, compared to what she was in the first book, just felt out of character in this third one. And I just feel like that just felt wrong to me. And therefore, I'm giving it 3.5 stars because I had a good time with it, but I just feel like it should have had a slightly different direction. That's all I'm gonna say. And then my 13th and final book of the month was Fredrik Backman's My Friends. So I did make it through everything that my TBR jar picked. I didn't think I was going to this month. I almost thought I wouldn't finish this, but I actually finished it this morning, and it is the last day of July and I'm just filming it now. But this book essentially reminds me a little bit of Anxious People that I read by Fredrik Backman, where it has some really serious and dark undertones and topics, but there is a very humorous way of telling it. And I think he is so good at that. Like, I have not found another writer, I don't think, that I feel is so humorous in telling really dark things. I think this is just his use of like stereotyping, and even though it's definitely exaggerated and hyperbole, like I just think it's done so well. So in this book we follow Louisa. Louisa has gone to this art sale to look at a painting that she's always wanted to see in person so she can really see the details on it. However, when she goes there, it all goes a bit wrong. People think she's there to destroy the painting. They call the police. She runs, and then she crashes into someone who she thinks is homeless out the back of this event. But it actually turns out it is the artist of this painting. She soon realizes this. They sort of vibe, but he's very, very unwell, very clearly unwell, and then she never gets to see him again. However, he leaves the painting to her. As a result, when his friend comes to give her the painting and find her to give it to her, she ends up tagging along, and they go on a journey back to where he grew up with his artist friend and other friends. And a lot of the story is about their journey to this place and him telling their backstory. So he tells her basically how and why this painting came to be. And just saying that, it makes it sound like a really boring story, but like that is literally the story, but it's just written in such a like heartwarming way. You learn a lot, you know, about characters, and there's a lot of sort of like subplots about the friends back in the day when they're at school and what they went through. And the whole idea is that Louisa sort of reminds him of one of their old friends, and so it's kind of like a full circle moment. So the idea is that someone worthy is getting this painting that has the same sort of vibe that his friends had. So yeah, overall, like it just goes through, like I said, some sort of darker topics, but it just overall has also some very heartwarming feelings, I guess, and just sort of about life and acceptance and other things. So yeah, I think it's great. I love everything I've read by Fredrik Backman, especially like I think Anxious People takes the win for me just a little bit, but I've still given this a 5-star rating because I just think it's so cleverly written and I still loved it. So yeah. So there we have it. Everything I read this month, and overall I think generally quite a strong month. Like there were some that I didn't rate super high, but there was nothing I hated. And I overall just think I got a really good mix of books, and I found some really good ones and ones that really made me feel very emotional. And I'm looking forward to getting through some more good books in August. If you haven't watched my TBR jar video to see what that picked, go and watch that so you can get an idea of what I might be reading in August. I also have my book club picks. However, one of them chose Ministry of Time, and I read that earlier this year, and I don't mind that because I then can get a little bit more off of my TBR and I can still discuss the book at book club because I love that book. So that's exciting. And my other one chose Under Your Scars by Ariel Sullivan. Is that her name? Sullivan? I think. I don't know what this is about, but they keep talking about us trauma bonding together. So I guess I'll find out. If you know, let me know. But yeah, thank you for watching. Let me know what your favorite read of July was, and I will see you again real soon. Bye.